Hey YouTubers, happy Saturday. So the big news is Fox has started to talk about their New Mutants movie. That's another X-Men spinoff, just like X-Force. The news is they've started to look at a couple of really big actors like Maisie Williams, so I'm going to talk about what's going on with the movie and how it ties in with Deadpool and the X-Men universe. Because all these movies are part of the greater X-Men universe, but some of them will be more self-contained than others. A really good example of that is the Deadpool movie in the way it crosses over with the X-Men movies. It really only references stuff that happens in the X-Men movies. It's kind of vague on the timeline. We only know that it's post-First Class. But if you've never heard of the New Mutants before, you have no idea what's going on with it. Just think about the concept behind the X-Men. Professor X training a bunch of mutants to fight evil. Think of the New Mutants as being a teenage version of that. A bunch of teenage mutants coming together to fight bad guys. So now you'll understand some of the casting choices that they've talked about. Actually, here's the roster of characters first, then I'll talk about the actors. So they have Wolfsbane, Magic, Cannonball, Mirage, Sunspot, Storm, and it's rumored that Professor X would be a part of it too. I don't know how big a part, but probably more than he was involved in the Deadpool movie. I think when they were building the Deadpool movie out, the circumstances were a little bit different. I think they're a little more open to using full-blown X-Men characters from those movies in these spin-off movies now. But let's talk about the actors and the people that are actually making the movie. Now remember, I said this is a group of teenage mutants coming together, so you'll understand the casting choices and the people that they picked to actually make the movie, like the director and the writers. So right now they're looking at Maisie Williams to play Wolfsbane, which I think is kind of funny because of all the stark wolf imagery going on Game of Thrones. They would just get the actors playing Storm and Apocalypse to star in this movie. They're basically taking Storm from X-Men Apocalypse and using her in this movie, just like they're using Professor X. Sunspot is a character that we saw during Days of Future Past, but presumably this would be a younger version, so they'd cast a different actor for him. And the only other team member that they've actually attached a name to, like an actress that they're looking for, is Anna Taylor-Joy for Magic. So we don't know who they're looking at for Cannonball, Mirage, or Sunspot, but if they're just in the casting phase, it's probably going to be a while before they start shooting the movie, and they still have to write it, they still have to work all the kinks out. So the person who is directing and co-writing the movie is the same person who did Fault in Our Stars, and the other person who is co-writing the script did the Jackass movies. So what I think it's going to look like is it's going to look like an X-Men film done more in the tone of Deadpool, which I think is just a giant win for everyone. Now we have to say it, nothing is going to be as ridiculous as Deadpool. There's some things that are only going to be funny when Deadpool does it, like all the dinosaurs were afraid of the T-Rex as his hands flop around. Like you can't really do that joke with other characters and have it be quite as funny. So just imagine X-Men characters written more in the tone of Deadpool, but not actually being quite as crazy as Deadpool. So that down the line when Deadpool really does show up, things go way off the rails. One of the great things about Deadpool and Cable is that as they get involved with other X-Men stories like bigger, larger teams, usually it's because Deadpool does something really stupid that completely messes what the X-Men are doing. Cable follows him, tries to fix it, and they all get caught up in this giant mess. Bit of a long shot, but down the road, really big team-up opportunity for Cable, Deadpool, and the New Mutants is a fight with Strife. They haven't done that character in the X-Men films. He's big and grand enough that you would have to save him for a big team-up movie like that. I think it could totally work. That's a really good question for you guys. Let me know in the comments. Do you think that once they do get the opportunity for a Deadpool, New Mutants, Cable crossover, you would want that to be a Strife story? If you have no idea who the Strife character is, I'll put some links in the description. I think I've done a couple of Deadpool Cable videos that explain him. Now, if you guys saw any of the Deadpool videos that I did before that movie came out, I talk about his first appearance, how that happened in New Mutants number 98. That's 98 issues deep in the comic. So even though you have New Mutants, Cable, and Deadpool all crossing over, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to do it exactly that way in the movie. Cable didn't really take over the New Mutants and start training them to fight Strife's group until Rob Liefeld came on the title, and that wasn't till issue number 86. That's when Rob Liefeld started working on the title. So the list of characters that I was just talking about that they're looking at for the movie are actually from the very first incarnation of the New Mutants, and that was created by Chris Claremont, very famous X-Men writer. The team's purpose initially was just to be a more teenage version of an X-Men story. So they didn't have all this complicated Cable, Strife, Deadpool stuff going on when they first debuted. It was just like, hey, let's get a bunch of teenage X-Men together and put them in their own comic. So I'm guessing that's kind of what Fox is thinking about for the New Mutants movie, but because they have so much history with Cable and Deadpool, even though it didn't come till later, they'll probably try and find a way to include them in the movie, at least in a small way. But most of the focus is going to be on these new characters. So if they're going to use Storm, who is a teenager during X-Men Apocalypse, I'm guessing that the events of the New Mutants movie is going to predate the events of Deadpool. So I don't know how they'd find a way to jam Deadpool or Cable in there, but Cable's a time traveler, so there might be a little bit of Cable. Maybe he'll name drop Deadpool. But just because of the timeline, and this taking place somewhere near the end of the 80s, early 90s, don't expect to see Deadpool the way you would see him in his own movies. If he were to show up, Deadpool would still be Wade Wilson, who is an assassin, so they could still use the Deadpool character. He just wouldn't be the Deadpool character of the Deadpool movie. He'd have to be snarky Wade Wilson, who's still in the military. But let me know in the comments, what do you think about the idea of a teenage X-Men movie? That's basically what New Mutants is sounding like, which I think is good because Fox has more X-Men characters, more like really interesting characters, than it could fit into a single X-Men film. So the other really cool thing is that there's also the X-Force movie, which they haven't said a lot about recently. I'm guessing it's just not as far along in development as New Mutants is. And part of the reason I think for doing New Mutants now is because all these new X-Men characters like Sophie Turner, Cyclops, they're all really young. So naturally, if you're going to do a spin-off movie and you want to use some of those characters, it would have to be a teenage team, which is how New Mutants got started in the first place. What about villains though? Who would a teenage X-Men team be fighting? Well, in the comics, when they initially started out, Hellfire Club was one of their big villain groups. Fox is trying to make a Hellfire Club TV series. It would make sense that just because people are aware because of First Class, they would try to use that group too. But the really cool thing about New Mutants that's a little bit different from what they've done with the X-Men films is that they get really heavy into mysticism. One of the characters' names is Magic. It's self-explanatory. Think about the way Marvel's broadening its universe with Doctor Strange and Iron Fist, powers that are based in magic and mysticism. So there's just a lot of cool things visually that they can do that they haven't been doing in the X-Men films. Some of you will be upset at the thought that they won't be able to do a straight-up Cable, Deadpool, and New Mutant story. They can totally get there. Just remember where this is probably going to be happening in the timeline. If they're going to be using Storm, it's probably going to happen right after the events of X-Men Apocalypse. So because they've already started working on Deadpool 2, and that's definitely going to include Cable, they'll do their Deadpool Cable story. It'll be tons of fun. It'll pick up in the events after the first Deadpool movie, but then once they get a really solid New Mutants debut out, they can work on weaving Cable and Deadpool into that franchise too. I think Fox is actually wise in the way it's trying to cross these characters over. You don't want to all just jam them into the same movie right away. You kind of want to build up to that. So there's a whole bunch of exciting stuff happening this weekend. While you guys wait for my next video to post, you can click here to learn all about Deadpool, Cable, and Strife. And you can click here for the Flash trailer video that I just posted. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Let's high five. I'll see you guys tonight.